Well, thanks for logging on to another edition of the Buyer's Guide. In this video, we're going to be looking at a Ringerbaits ground bait. It's the European feeder mix. This mix is a cereals based mix, so it's one that is suited for catching fish of all sizes. So obviously it's the kind of mix that you might be wanting to use at this time of year, now that the water temperatures are getting cooler and bites are becoming harder to come by, and you're wanting to feed less as well. So it's not a fish meal mix, it's a cereal mix, and it's one that we've been using for about a year or so now. So let's check the packaging out just to see what it tells us about the mix. Well, the Ringer's groundbait's always clearly distinguished from a lot of the others. Got the gold and the black and the logo on there as well. But this is the European feeder mix, as it clearly states on the bag. Okay, we've got a picture of a feeder on there, and that's telling you exactly what the mix is designed for. And because that's a window in the packaging, we can obviously see the mix. You can see it's a really dark colour. Now, I need to mention that this is the European feeder dark version. There is a natural version which is a more brown crumb type of colour, so that's a much lighter mix in colour, alright, but this is the dark version, and this is the version that I've used the most. Okay, so you can see how really dark it is, you can see how fine it is, and obviously we'll see more of that when we start mixing it. On the back we've got a little bit of a description about the actual range itself. Okay, and then we've got, just like on all the other bags of Ringerbaits ground bait like this, we've got the typical analysis, raw protein in there, raw ash, raw fibre and raw fats, and it gives you the percentages of them as well. We've also got a batch label, a batch number on there as well, which I think is great because it gives you an idea of how old a ground bait is. Because let's face it, when you're fishing with ground baits, we know that a massive part of our fishing, certainly feeder fishing, is about confidence. And certainly at this time of year, when you're only fishing for a handful of bites on some venues, you know, you need your confidence to be right up there. And if you're confident that this mix or the ground bait that you're using hasn't been sat on the shelf in a tackle shop for 3 years, then you know it can only help your confidence. So as you can see, the best before date on this particular bag is 5/11/20. So we get an idea what this mix is about. It's a feeder mix, it's obviously dark, so it's suited to this time of year when the water clarity is much clearer, and we can see it's really fine, so you're not going to be giving the fish loads and loads of feed. So what I'm going to do is, I've used this mix, like I say, on and off for about 8-10 months now, but I'm going to mix it up for you now, just so you can see how it mixes up, how dark it goes, how flexible it is, can you over wet it, and does it bind very well. So I'm going to grab the bowl and let's get some mixed up. Now, I know that most people don't use drills, so just like with every video in this series, I'm not going to be using a drill, I'm just going to mix it by hand, because I know most people mix their ground bait that way. And it's going to give you an idea of how, you know, if there are any lumps in it and that sort of thing. It's strongly recommended to put all ground baits through a riddle or through a sieve anyway, but I know some anglers don't really want to bother like that, so this will give you an idea of how it actually mixes up. Now, the smell that's coming to me straight away in that is, it's quite a sweet mix. It's quite a, I don't know if you'd say chocolatey kind of flavour in there. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it's very dark. There are tiny bits of feed in there, but not much. Okay, so let's get this mixed up. No doubt it'll go darker once we start adding water to it. So let's have a look. Just add your water little and often, as always with all your ground baits. You see those tiny white flecks of feed in there as well. Okay. Now, what I strongly suspect, just from my experience of using mixers like this, is that those little flecks might need a little bit longer to soak in water, because you might find they're active. However, saying that, when we have used this mix in the past, when we've used it in Ireland and places like that where we're fishing for roach, fishing for perch, fishing for hybrids, fishing for almost anything that swims, it can quite often pay to have a mix that's got little particles coming off it and fizzing off it, because as a lot of you will already know, when you're fishing for hybrids, quite often those fish and the roach are up in the water, and sometimes having those particles coming off your ground bait and coming up in the water can attract fish into your swim. Okay, I'm not saying you want like that, you know, you don't want it fizzing like that for the whole session, but certainly to kickstart your swim, or just to try and draw a few fish back into the feed area, then that can often be the way to go. So I'm not going to put too much water in this. When I've fished with this mix before, we've kind of fished it in two ways. One is a little bit dry, and that is just to kickstart the peg, or just to try and draw some fish back into the peg, quite often with a cage feeder. And then once you get the fish in your peg, you really want to control them and try and get them down on the bottom where they're easier to catch. So once you've got the fish in your peg, it can quite often be a case of either adding a little bit more water to the mix to make it a bit more inert, just so it goes down. But you can also switch to a plastic feeder just to kind of encase it more from the water so that it's more inclined to empty right down on the deck, and just try and reduce on all that fizziness. So the fish then, if they're in the peg, they've then got to go down for the feed, where hopefully they're going to be a little bit easier to catch. So what I'm going to do is, I'm not going to add too, I mean that's really kicking up that flavour now, but you can see those lighter coloured particles in there. Alright, so what I'm going to do is, just like I've done with every single ground bait in this series so far, I'm going to give this exactly 10 minutes. Alright, usually match scenario I would give it a little bit longer, because I'd mix it as soon as I got to my peg. But I'm going to give it 10 minutes, I'll probably have to go back to it, and then we'll see. You know, does it bind very well? Can you over wet it? And then we'll also have a look at it in the tank. Right, well that's been exactly 10 minutes. I've just had to add a little bit more water to it, and I dare say if I left it longer I'd have to add a little bit more as well. So quite often when we're fishing in an island and with mixers like this, it's a good idea, or it's good practice to mix it up first thing in the morning before you even set off to the venue. That way all these particles in here are going to have a chance to absorb water, so by the time you get to your peg and the match starts, all this is going to be what we would class as a finished mix. Okay, but it's been 10 minutes now, so I can smell where obviously there's a little bit of bread in there as well. You can smell it, almost like crummy smell, but that's what it is. It's a cereal mix, you know. There's no hint of fish meal in there or anything. There's odd little lumps in there, but that's just the way that I've mixed it. Always put your ground bait through a riddle anyway, through a sieve, okay, if you can. Alright, so let's just see how it binds. I mean, the first thing is there's virtually nothing on my hands. There's a tiny little bit of darkness there. That's obviously from the ground bait itself, but there's no stickiness there, there's no oil. Okay, binding wise, that binds pretty good. That binds pretty good. And that's great for when you're fishing in places like Ireland, because certainly the vast majority of the competitions in Ireland and on venues like that, any method is allowed, you know, so you are putting a pole up as well. And there's nothing worse than if you're fishing a pole and a feeder, if you're having to carry two different mixers with you, it just overcomplicates things, you know. And there's enough kit and tattle to carry as it is on those sorts of venues, on the natural venues, where you don't want to be carrying two ground bait mixers as well. So this mix, while it's obviously called European feeder, that will squeeze into a nice ball, and you could feed that on a pole line as well, which means it's obviously very versatile that way. So, you know, which is great. I mean, that's ideally what you want. Overwetting the mix, let's see if we can overwet it. Like I said, there's no oil or anything coming off onto my hands, just some of the darkness off the ground bait. And what we'll do is we'll add quite a bit of extra water there, and we'll just see what happens when we overwet it. It's obviously gone a lot darker, but yeah, that's allowing me to overwet it. So you could fish that as a slop, or really wet in a feeder. Okay, so that's great. Again, it's another string to your bow. You know, it's something else that it does. Okay, so that's great. I mean, that's good to see that happening. What I'm going to do now is just get the dry side of this mix and put it in a cage feeder and just see how it performs in the tank. Well, we've already seen that this binds pretty well, so we could squeeze it into balls and introduce it into the swim that way, which is great. It means it's nice and versatile. But what I'm going to do now is, I've got a nice fine wire cage feeder, and I'm going to fill this with the ground bait, just at what you would call a medium consistency and medium strength. Alright, now I'm squeezing this in as though I'm going to cast that 40 metres into about 8 or 10 feet of water. I just think that's pretty standard. Okay, so I'm not packing it in really tight, and it's going to be interesting to see what comes off this. I think because it's only been resting, well, 12 minutes now, that I think we're going to get quite a bit of activity coming off it, but we'll find out when we get it in the tank. There we go, so we've got quite a few of the particles coming off there, but not as much as I expected. To say this has only had 12 minutes to settle, which is nowhere near what we would normally do in a match scenario. I mean, normally in Ireland, and when we're fishing those sorts of venues and those festivals, we would mix this on the morning back at the digs, and that could literally be 3-4 hours, could even be 5 hours before the match even starts. So a lot of these particles will have had a lot more time to soak up those, you know, the water Now there's a bit of fizzing coming off there, but there is absolutely nowhere near as much as what I expected coming off that. It still stayed very, very dark. There's almost a black glow, you know, a shadow around the feeder. That's not my bad lighting in the tank, it's just the way that groundbait is. But that, I mean, that stayed in the feeder pretty well. There's no real cloud coming off it. There was a bit of a haze, but there's far less fizzing and activity coming off that than what I expected personally, which is great, you know, because obviously what you can do is you can mix this drier. If you do want that activity with a mix like this, just don't add quite as much water as what I've put to it. So you could, you know, in the morning you could mix your mix quite dry, so that you've got it really dry, because these larger particles, I'm sure, well, like I say, I've used this before, and I know that they can be more active and come and rise up away from the feeder. But obviously if you do that, then you can always add water to it when you get to your peg or during the session to make it a little more inert, like it is now, because there's virtually nothing coming off that. But I know that if I mix that a lot drier, you would have had more particles coming off it. So, you know, when you mix your ground bait, that doesn't always mean it's in that finished state, because there's different ways of fishing with it, and that obviously depends on the type of feeder that you're using with it as well. Okay, so you can put more activity into your peg by having a dry mix and a cage feeder. If you want to deaden it down, I mean, as you can see on that, I mean, that is really quite inert. I'm really surprised at that. And that would be ideal for bigger fish, you know, for bottom feeding fish, obviously, like bream and skimmers. So yeah, very interesting. I think we're going to get quite a bit kicked up off this. I've just got a feeling that when I move this, we're going to get a bit of a cloud. There we go. Yeah, so there's a nice cloud there, but it is falling quite quick. So it's more not like a wet cloud that hangs in there. It's more particles that have gone up there, but they've come down pretty quick. So you can see, just by taking your feeder out of the peg, you've created even more attraction. That was dead, the water was clear before I moved the feeder. All I've done is, if I was fishing now, I've just reeled the feeder in. I've not done anything different, just reeled in, and look at that, what it's creating now. And again, it's another attractor for the fish to come in and home in on. Very, very interesting. I'm glad we did that, because that surprised me. I thought with some of these larger particles in here, I thought they would have been a lot more active, and to say they've only had 12 minutes to set to rest, that's really, really surprising. Now, as regards credentials for this mix, this is the same mix that Phil and Steve Ringer were runners up in the World Pairs competition 2018. I know they use this because I was there every morning when they were mixing it in the same place. I know they use this mix. That's when it was virtually brand new to them. It was a new mix, and I know that Adam Wakeling, who was 5th in the pairs competition as well, he used this mix as well. That's the same year, and myself and Richie Hull used this mix at the World Pairs in September. So, and you know, we came away with quite a few envelopes, county wins, and so we know that this mix does the business. But it's more about thinking about how you're going to use it. It's the kind of mix that you can't just, you know, don't just fish with it one way, because it's a cereal mix, because you're fishing, it's one that's more suited to natural venues, you're fishing for bites. That's when you can keep ringing the changes, and by just varying the mix and the consistency of the water in there, and the dryness of the ground bait and all that sort of business, then you can just constantly keep triggering bites and keep fish hopefully going in the net. As regards getting hold of this ground bait, Ringerbaits are readily available up and down the country and in Europe as well now. Lots and lots of tackle shops stock Ringerbaits. Now, just like many other Ringerbaits, these are sold in 1 kilo bags, and they're £3.99, which is very, very reasonable. I'm sure you'll agree when you compare it to some of the other ground baits that are out there. If you've used this mix, please comment below, let other viewers know what your experiences of using this mix. And this is certainly one that I've had in my armoury for the last year or so now, and I've used it in certain scenarios that have suited what this mix is all about. So if you're a retailer as well and you do stock this kind of ground bait, these mixes, then please comment below, let the viewers know where they can get hold of these ground baits, but you can obviously get them online as well. I hope you've enjoyed this bit of an insight into this mix. This has been quite an important mix when you're heading off to something like the World Pairs. You want to obviously take your A game, and this was the mix that we had with us last year, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be using it again in that same event next year, and on some of the natural venues that I know we're going to be fishing going into 2020. If you've enjoyed this video, just please give it a thumbs up, because that lets me know that you want to see these sorts of videos, and I'll keep producing them for you. I've got dozens and dozens of different sort of ground bait mixers still to show you, and if you want me to keep producing these videos, I'd appreciate the thumbs up and comment below. Let me know what you think. If you don't want to miss out on any of the videos, please hit that subscribe button right there. And if you'd like to see more in-depth coaching style videos, then you might want to check out my other video channel, which is Patron TV. And that's at that link just there, and the web address in the bottom left hand corner. So thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the first week of the buyer's guide to baits, and I look forward to reading your comments below, and I hope to see you all in the next video, where we're going to be looking at so many more different mixers.